We simply cannot allow people to pour into the United States undetected, undocumented, unchecked.
And complete the dang fence.
This bill that we will sign today is not a revolutionary bill. Cast down your bucket where you are.
We come from France.
And I am, adamantly against illegal immigrants.
They're coming in by the thousands, just unbelievable.
A wall is an immorality.
Who are you rooting for?
Those masters of the universe are at it again.
They're not sending their best.
You maniac! You blew it up!
Welcome to Parsing Immigration Policy, the podcast of the Center for Immigration Studies. My name is Mark Krikorian, Executive Director of the Center. And today we're doing something different and something I think all of us in the immigration debate need to do more of, which is talking with someone, I guess we could put it on the other side of the issue. Gaby Pacheco is President and CEO of The Dream US. TheDream.us is the web address. And she herself was a dreamer, in other words, came as a child, and she'll explain maybe in a little more details how that worked out, and was here illegally. It benefited from DACA, and I want to talk about the whole issue of dreamers and DACA and what have you, and this is something, like I said, all of us need to do a lot more of in talking to each other, because even if we don't agree, we at least need to do this. So, Gaby, I really appreciate your coming in. And if you could maybe start just by a little bit about yourself. How did you get to be Gaby Pacheco?
Yeah, thank you, Mark. Well, it's such a great opportunity to be here. I don't know if you remember, but I reached out to you now over a decade ago because I believe that it's really important for us to have these conversations. And I was always curious of learning more about your viewpoints, where you came from. I've always believed that it's really important for human beings to treat each other like human beings and with respect. And
agreed.
We can have different views. And it's just been always so nice to know that we can have this dialogue. And I think a lot of the times, even though we come from different points of views, we end up kind of agreeing on the ideas that there's something that's happening, that our government is not functioning correctly, and that it's at the end of the day hurting people. And so I came to the United States as an 8-year-old. I actually thought I was 7 when I came, and I didn't know it was 8 until I applied for DACA. And I felt so bad because I had been doing dozens and countless of interviews where I had said, I came when I was 7 years old. And I thought, how am I going to correct this record? I've been lying this whole entire time and I didn't know.
From where?
I moved to the United States from Ecuador.
Okay.
My family actually would visit the United States. Our story is a little bit different than most, where economically, yes, there were some struggles, but it was mostly this desire of safety. Also, my dad, believe it or not, had this dream where he felt that God was telling him to come to the United States. And my older sister was already here. She had come to the United States prior and wanted to learn English and convince my parents to send her here to live with my aunt and uncle. And then my other sister, my mom and dad would come to the U.S. for medical attention for her. She had to get ear surgeries. Mm-hmm. And so we knew of the United States. My parents had an apartment here that they had bought as a form of business. And so there was some pull, right, that kept saying, come to the United States. And we moved here in 1993. We moved into Miami, Florida. And I, at that time, didn't understand that I was moving from one country to another. I actually thought that Ecuador was the whole entire world because when you turn the globe, you see the equator. Oh. And so in my mind, as a little girl, I thought, Ecuador's the whole entire world. And it wasn't until I really looked at the map and realized, I live in the United States, a huge country compared to Ecuador and South America, which, funny enough, Mark, a lot of times when I tell people I'm from Ecuador, they say, what part of Mexico is that? Well, it's interesting. And, you talked about my illegality or my status. We actually came with the visa, and my parents hired an attorney and they started a process. My parents wanting to ensure that we didn't stay without status, got us international student visas. And I actually lost my visa, which was a duration status visa. When I went from elementary school to middle school, they didn't know that you had to actually go and switch it and get a new one.
Right.
And it wasn't until my older sister was trying to go to college that my whole entire family realized, oh no, we made a mistake here. We don't have status. And Mark, I actually was able to renew my visa.
Mm-hmm.
When I tell this to attorneys and others, they're puzzled, and I'm like, I'm a very determined person.
Yeah.
And I was able to renew the visa in 2004.
Mm-hmm.
And then, I don't know if you remember this, but I did a walk from Miami to Washington, D.C. called the Trail of Dreams.
Kind of, yeah.
And doing that walk meant losing that international student visa again because I was no longer in school.
Right.
And I became undocumented. And then I was able to get DACA and then a green card through a marriage petition and then citizenship 2 years ago. So it's been a really difficult but long journey of having immigration status and not. And it really has been frustrating for me and my family because we had an attorney, we paid. My dad became first a music minister at a church,
mm-hmm.
and he was working to get a religious visa. Unfortunately, as it happens a lot, human error, the paralegal that was working on our case didn't realize that we had received an RFE, which is a request for further information. And you only have 33 days to respond. If you don't, you kind of vacate your visa that you were searching. And so in the late 90s, this happens. We didn't know about it until later. My parents would call the attorney. My sister would be the one that would translate. They would say, call Texas. That was the cue to call Immigration Center in Texas to see where our application was.
Mm-hmm.
And my dad actually became a Southern Baptist preacher. And that's the visa that they were working towards. And unfortunately, because of human error, and even though thousands of dollars had been paid to this attorney, there really was nothing for my family to do but, leave the country. And that was not going to be an option because now we had really strong roots in the United States.
So how did you get involved in DACA sort of as an activism type of thing?
Well, first of all, in 2006, ICE raided our home. They were looking for me. I was a activist and a loudmouth, and somebody called ICE and said, you got to go look after this, girl. And they did an investigation and unfortunately found my parents and my sister, which they were put in deportation proceedings. But remember, I had a visa.
Right.
So I was safe in essence. But during that time, the year before that, there was a dreamer, Marie Gonzalez, who was able to stay in the country with something called Deferred Action. And so in 2006, I called her and I said, hey, I'm going through this. How did you stay in the country? And she said, well, two things, community support and deferred action. And so that's when I had an aha moment and started, in essence, saying, we should get deferred action for my family. That's going to be the solution to be able to keep them in the United States. And then came the Obama administration, and we were seeing just a rapid number of people getting detained. And we were like, wait a minute, why are the dreamers, who at the time and still today have a huge support from the community? I think it's like right now, if you poll, 85% of Americans, including 71% of Republicans, believe that children who came to the United States should have an ability to be able to find a path to legalization. And so that's where, for me, it kind of started. And I started researching and reading about what were the powers and the supports that the president can do. And we looked at what it's called TPS, Temporary Protective Status.
Which is country specific.
Country specifics, right. And said, well, can they do this, right, at a larger scale for a population of folks? And so we have seen it, right? During the Obama administration, they tried what was called the Morton Memo, which provided guidance and prosecutorial discretion and who could get what. And so that's where, for me, it started. It really was learning from another dreamer who was able to stay in the country. Prior to that, in 2003, the first dreamer case was able to stay in the United States because there was a private bill that was
Right.
introduced by Senator Lindsey Graham.
A private bill, just for the listeners, is a bill introduced in Congress, but for a specific person or several people, named people.
Correct. And so, but we knew, right? How do you do that at scale?
Right, yeah,
and so it was looking at deferred action and what were the powers, right, that the executive order or an executive action that the executive branch could have to be able to, on a temporary basis, right, where we were not talking about bypassing Congress in essence, but doing something that would give an opportunity for the deportations of this class of people, the Dreamers, to halt.
Yeah, a couple of points before, because I want to ask some more about DACA, but before DACA happened, the Obama administration had a window early on where it actually had 60 votes in the Senate and could have passed literally anything they wanted. They chose to go with Obamacare rather than an immigration bill. Personally, I'm glad that's the way they went, but I suspect there was a significant amount of frustration, especially on the part of Dreamer activists, that was the White House's choice. Were you sort of involved in that? Did you have any reaction to it at the time? What were your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it was extremely frustrating because prior to Obama getting elected, I actually was on the McCain camp. And I believe that if Senator McCain would have been president, we probably would have gotten immigration reform done.
Personally speaking, that's why I couldn't vote for McCain, because you made exactly the same assessment that I did, that he was more likely to have made it a priority, especially in the first term, than Obama was.
Yeah.
And we were both right.
Well, here's the thing and the reality that this is the frustrating thing, right? What I feel is that the Republican Party many times weaponizes the issue of immigration, and the Democratic Party utilizes that to make politics, right? And neither party wants to get this done and find a solution. And that's been really frustrating. And during the Obama administration, what we saw and what I felt was that while there might be a couple of Democrats that were championed, as a party, they weren't the party of the immigrants and the ones that were going to find a solution. They knew, right, that this is a really good legislation, policy, conversation, whatever it is, right, to hit back Republicans and say, oh, we are going to solve the issue. We're the ones that support immigrants, et cetera, et cetera. In actuality, we weren't on a priority, right? And as you mentioned, they had the votes. They had, and in 2010, the Dream Act actually came up for a vote. It passed in the House.
After the election was a lame duck session.
It was a lame duck session.
Rushing it at the end.
Rushing at the end. They did that purposely, too. And they put the Dream Act back to back with two very difficult bills. And I don't know if you remember this, but the Dream Act came first. And then the last vote was Don't Ask, Don't Tell. So they put, in essence, Republicans, practically they pushed them to the wall and said, you have to pick one, right?
Right, yeah.
And you're going to take a hard vote. And of course, Republicans were not going to vote on an immigration bill. And it was very unfortunate because we did have some Republicans that voted. We got to 55 votes. And if
in the Senate, but not the 60.
Right. Correct. And if your classes, your civic government classes were the same as mine, majority is 50 plus 1, right? 51. But unfortunately, because of filibuster, we needed to get to the 60. Interesting enough, Mark, there was 5 Democrats that could have voted, but chose not to. Mm-hmm. Some of them were at a party somewhere for the holidays. It was on December 21. And the other ones were just too scared to vote because they had a tough election. And it was very unfortunate because all of that was done very calculated, right? They wanted to be able to have, again...
I see. Use it as an issue.
Right? And it was very unfortunate because there is, again, some champions, like Senator Durbin has been a champion for Dreamers. But unfortunately, right, politics, again, won and people lost.
So specifically on the legislative question, I want to get to DACA and whether you sort of the wisdom of going about it that way. But on the legislative issue, my feeling has always been that yes, dreamers, especially those who came genuinely at a young age, in other words, not 15 and a half, but, kids who came at 6 or 7 years old or something like that, or even younger, are a sympathetic group of people. In other words, they're legally not culpable for their parents' actions. But my sense has always been that there's a significant element of maybe not the dreamer activist, but I think even the dreamer activist who you want to use it as a stalking horse for a broader amnesty bill. In other words, for getting legal status for more people. Sort of the way I put it is show the sympathetic young people as a poster children, therefore vote for legalization for everybody. And I think that's been one of the problems, because a targeted bill on dreamers that also included some offsets, I think could have been, I'm not saying it would have passed at any particular time, but it would have been a strategy that would have been a lot more likely to result in success. I assume you guys have talked about that and thought about
100% agree with you. And it was a huge point of contention and infighting within the dreamer community.
Right.
And in 2010, Mark, I remember it was the summer and we kept on, and even on the Trail of Dreams, when we were walking, we had organizations that were trying to downplay and practically dim the light of what we were doing. And we, of course, wanted comprehensive immigration reform. I've been one of the people that has said we need to reform our immigration laws. We need to ensure that we look at, and I'm one of the immigrant activists that sometimes people are like, huh? In 2006, I was saying we needed E-Verify. And I've been saying, we need to ensure that people have legal pathways to be able to come into this country for economic reasons. And we know we have our refugee systems, our asylum systems, and sometimes our asylum systems, reality is, and people don't want to say this, but it does get abused, right? Because there are out there people who say, oh, if you say X, Y, and Z, you'll be able to get in. And there are people that economically just want to come and work 2-3 years, make enough money to be able to build their house and wherever country and go back, right? And so I have been one of those people that have said, hey, we need to be realistic about our facts on our country and the issues that we have as a whole. And in 2010, we were saying we need the Dream Act as a standalone bill. And we were successful in getting the Dream Act standalone bill. However, we got a lot of pushback. And I had people telling me that I was selfish, that how dare I not think about my parents.
Yeah, a lot of that came out in the press, that kind of, there's no question.
Yeah, we were called petulant children, right? All these different names and stuff. And later, 2 years after that, right, during the whole push for deferred action, I was even told that I would be responsible for the first African-American president losing his reelection campaign, right? So yes, I think that anybody that wants and cares about getting this done and knows politics, because here's the thing, right? If you understand politics, if you understand how Washington, D.C. works, anything that is huge and big, it's going to fail. It's going to topple like the Christmas tree that has just too many ornaments. And the infighting between the two parties, and it's not just even the House, right? It's the Senate. And then having to get those two bodies to agree, it's very, very difficult when you have 10, 20 different things you want to, try to get something done in a bill. Right. So smaller standalone bills has always been, I think, the smarter way to go about this. And the Dream Act, right, as a standalone legislation, if we would have had it and if it would have passed in 2010, many of the dreamers, we wouldn't have DACA. Many of the dreamers today would be citizens like myself. The statistics show how incredibly important we are to the economy. And I think one of the most interesting things that you talk a lot about, and I hear you talk a lot about, is just this integration assimilation, right? I may have an accent. I don't know if I do. Some people tell me I don't.
A little bit, but not much. No.
Well, it's usually my Miami accent that comes out. But Mark, I can tell you with just full honesty that this is my country. This is the only country I know. I love this country. And I don't know much about Ecuador. I know more about Mexico because of telenovelas and the culture here in the United States than I do of Ecuador. And it's not that I'm not proud of my heritage and where I come from, but reality is that, I came as an 8-year-old. The Dream.us, the average age of arrival of our students is 4 years old. People tell me all the time, I don't know where, I came from. And sadly, some of them say, I don't even speak Spanish, right? I've completely acculturated, assimilated to the United States.
I do just want to interject. The DACA application did allow for interpreters to fill it out for you. A lot of them spoke English, I have no doubt, but a lot of them did not. And the Obama administration made sure not to tally that information on the application, so we have no idea whether it was 1% or whether it was 20%. I just wanted to interject that because that's always been a bugbear of mine. But I mean, let me get to
we can talk about language acquisition. I actually did study. My background is education, and language acquisition is one big piece. But yes, most people that come after the age of 14, it becomes really hard to learn a second
Inevitably,
language.
it's because of the development of your brain.
Correct.
But that was one thing I wanted to ask about related to the Dream Act and whether you guys had talked about this. The various iterations of it, there have been different ones, but generally it's people who arrive before age 16. And had you guys discussed about, say, moving the age limit down to, say, 10 or something? In other words, to be able to make what I think might be a more persuasive case to the public, because, in much of the developing world, 15-year-old is already getting a construction job or something. You know what I mean? So, and like you said, there's been a certain level of cognitive development, so it becomes harder to learn another language for anybody. Had you guys ever discussed actually lowering the age threshold rather than there's been a creep of it going upwards in various iterations of it?
Yeah, this is actually one of the discussions that we had.
That's what I figured,
and what you call the Dream Act 2.0, I believe, you can correct me, you had it at age 12. And when we had the discussion, it was around like the bar mitzvahs and when individual, depending on different religions, they are deemed to now have a different, no longer childlike mentality.
I mean, historically, in various cultures, the dividing line's often either been, like you said, sort of bar mitzvah age, which is tied to puberty, or earlier to like 7 or 8 years old, which is when you have, I believe for Catholics, is first communion. You know what I mean? So, and the point there is the child, I forget what it's called, age of something or other, where the kid is sort of more aware of what's going on. Anyway, that was my point, was that 16 years old isn't really a meaningful cutoff.
I have a 16-year-old niece, and she's still a child. She does not want me to say that, and I will not tell her I said this here.
Yeah, Gaby, I don't even know what I'm going to do when I grow up.
Yeah.
And so, but anyway, you have to draw a line somewhere.
You do, Mark. And I think that that's what a healthy discussion would have been, to find some compromises. And I do believe in compromises. And I do believe in, let me tell you, one of the hardest things for the DACA program was knowing that myself and my brother were going to be able to apply for it. And my sister, who was just a few months too old, couldn't apply for this program. And we all came, and she came to the United States when she was 13 years old, and is the hardest working person that in my family. And it was so hard, right? But unfortunately, again, politics, you have to have lines. And there are individuals that unfortunately are not going to sometimes make the line and the cut.
Right.
And so you have to kind of figure out, right, what is that sweet spot and to be able to get an agreement to move something forward. And you move something forward with the least amount of pain and hurt and bad policy. And you move something that you're going to help as many people as you can.
Along those lines, and again, I do want to get to the nature of the issuance of DACA, and which I think has created a lot of political kind of animosity that's made it harder to actually address these issues. But in 2018, the Trump White House did move in the House legislation to give green cards, basically upgrade DACA recipients to full green cards, and to give those green cards to a larger dreamer universe. Would have potentially amnestied 2 million, maybe more people, but there were a lot of counter, measures, changes to legal immigration and enforcement or what have you. What was the thinking, at least that as far as you go, about whether that deal was either worth it or why it fell apart or whatever?
Again, it was politics, and it was people wanting a perfect bill. You're never going to have a perfect bill. And it was similar, right, with the Brown-King Amendment that was going to provide $25 billion for the wall in exchange for the Dreamer population. And we were for it. And we were on the Senate, and we were working with Republicans and Democrats saying, move this forward. We need a solution. And it was very unfortunate to see both President Trump and organizations on the left and immigrant rights organizations being completely against it. And so, I've been so frustrated for the last 20 years.
Welcome to the club.
Thank you. And I really am hopeful because, I've always said, even since Senator McCain in 2008, we're not going to get immigration reform under a Democratic president. I don't think that's going to happen. And, Trump is a wild card here.
Sure.
I don't necessarily see him as a Republican per se, right, with the Republican values. But I am hopeful because there is going to be a breaking point, and I think we're not there yet. I think we're seeing a lot of enforcement and really scary stuff. I'm afraid of what's happening to our due process and how that starts corroding some things. But at the end of the day, you do still have a large population of immigrants in this country. You do have a dreamer population that, depending on the age of arrival, can be anywhere between a 1.5 million to 2, maybe 3, if you're looking at those that came under the age of 18. And then you have, right, populations of people that have had and have lived in the United States for a very long time, that have strong roots, that have homes and cars and children and really good jobs and industries that depend on them. And so there's going to be a breaking point. And I do think majority of Americans, like I mentioned before, support being able to find a solution for dreamers.
So I want to get now specifically to DACA. It was 2012. It was a lead up to the election, as I understand it. And I've heard this from people who should know that this was clearly thought of by the White House as a election measure, that they were trying to goose enthusiasm among Hispanic voters, because in the end, he had no problem winning re-election, but you never know that ahead of time. So obviously, you benefited from DACA, so I'm not asking you to say I shouldn't have gotten DACA, but what do you think, if you sort of step back, was the president doing something that he had seemingly said he wasn't authorized to do, and that there's been multiple court rulings now that are not final, but that said, look, this was clearly unlawful. Was that a wise move now 13 years ago?
So I do believe it was a wise move. However, I do think it took out some of the pressure and the air in the room to get something done. I was very much involved in the 2013 movement to try to get immigration done, and
the Gang of Eight,
and that was moving forward, and the votes were in the House. Famously, I don't know if you folks remember, Eric Cantor loses, and then everything kind of dissolved.
He lost his primary to an immigration hawk, Dave Bratton, right? That took the air out of that.
Took the air out of that.
I gotta say, I'm glad that happened, but yes, but the fact is what
Mark,
it is.
We've been so close so many times. Yeah. You need to give us the lotto number or something, because there's something's happening on your side. But yeah, DACA was really important for several reasons. The first is that it gave us a blueprint and a look into what happens when you allow people to quote unquote make the line, right? Put themselves forward, pay a fee, pay a fine, submit their application, do biometrics, and get two things: protection of deportation and work authorization. And being able to show, right, that it can be done. Our government does have the capacity to bring people out of the shadows and give them some sort of status and know who they are and where they live and what they do, right? Showed us it can be done. And then this population of people have just really helped and supported our economy, and they're teachers and nurses and doctors. And there's a DACA doctor that is studying cancer and was working and was the head of the Harvard Institute for Cancer. And now she's moved to another hospital. And so those stories, right, that we hear a lot about and that are very compelling are truth and reality. And that's the majority. And I know what you're going to tell me, for example, right, of some applications, people were able to get support to get them translated. But
no, but my point is not that obviously there's always going to be individual stories, either on the good or the bad side, because there's obviously DACA criminals. I mean, you got hundreds of thousands of people, you're going to have everything. No, but my question is more, because it wasn't legislated, it lacks democratic legitimacy, because even if you didn't like it, if Congress passes it, well, it's like, well, too bad, and I'm going to try to change it maybe, but at least it's accepted as legitimate. And that's my concern. And just to finish the thought, that has further poisoned the debate over immigration in a way that IRCA did 40 years ago with its promises of ending illegal immigration in exchange for amnesty. That's kind of the plus or minus that I was talking about. Yeah.
Well, here's what I see, Mark, that a lot of people kind of warned, and it's happening. You are seeing the same use of executive power to, in essence, create an immigration policy bypassing Congress, if we're talking about that, right, to a greater extent by the Trump administration.
I disagree on that one, but I understand
Trump
what you're saying. Yeah.
Right. And reality is that this is the beauty of our country and our democracy, that we have the executive branch, we have the legislative branch, and the judicial branch. And each one plays a role. DACA was I never thought in a million years, Mark, that we were going to have DACA and celebrating its 13th anniversary and the 10th and 11th and 12th, right? And that people were going to be in this eternal limbo status that they have to be renewing every 2 years, and that there's no certainty. And there's still no certainty today, because we know that there's been court involvement. We know that today, right, there's still conversations around, will those that live in Texas be able to renew, et cetera, right? Long-term policies need to go through the legislative branch. We need to have laws. And this was a stopgap measure. This was not supposed to be something into eternity. But reality is that we have it. And I do believe that it was something beneficial. You mentioned it. It benefited me. If I wouldn't have been able to apply for DACA, I wouldn't have been able to buy a home, be able to have the job that I had, be able to have health care. In 2006, I had a, health scare. Was going through cancer treatment and all this stuff. And I wouldn't have been able to be here today if it wasn't for that. So yes. And I understand, right, that at the end of the day, the executive branch, there could be a breach, right? And that is the debate. But legally, I still believe that he had the power to do it. We looked at every single way. We had attorneys, and I'm not an attorney, so we depended a lot on that and on the law. But yeah, I think in retrospect, right, it is always a catch-22. And when people have pushed me as an Ecuadorian to go ask for, in the past, right, when Ecuador was struggling and having issues, to ask for TPS for Ecuadorians, I was like, I don't know if that's the best move, because it's supposed to be a temporary protective status, right? It's supposed to end at a time. And if Ecuador is supposed to, be better, and it was all around the safety, right, of what was happening in Ecuador, I don't know if it's good to give something to somebody and then take it away. after
Except that
2 years.
until this administration, no one's ever even attempted to take it away.
But it's now such a huge issue, right?
I know. I agree. I really appreciate it. I want to give you if you could explain a little bit, what is the organization, the Dream.us? I mean, it's not like I want to give it a advertising plug, but I mean, you're a guest and I want you to tell us,
thank you.
When was this founded? What is it? Is it just a web-based thing? And how new is it? Because there's various dreamer groups, and honestly, I can't keep them all straight. I mean, nothing personal, but
yeah. Well, so we've been around for 11 years,
mm-hmm.
and we started right after the DACA programs was announced in 2013. That's when we started formulating, putting this together, and it was to support and help, in essence, young people. The one of the co-founders, Don Graham, learned about a DC
former publisher of the Washington Post.
That's right.
Right.
Learned about a student who was either the valedictorian or the salutatorian of the school and couldn't go to college because of just all these things, right? In-state tuition, and didn't have access to Pell Grants or loans, and thought, well, if they have the ability, they're here, they have work authorization, why are we not supporting the talent of these young people who want to go to college, want to be nurses? That's until last year, that was our number one degree, nursing.
Okay.
And so
it was mainly an educational thing, is what I'm asking about the organization.
Correct. So we support young people, dreamers who want to go to college, and we support them through that with scholarships.
Right. Okay. Excellent. I appreciate it. I think this was a good discussion. And we'll put a link to the website. This will be the first time we'll have a link in our show notes.
Wait, Mark, do not have the link if people are going to come and tell me really mean things.
Oh, well, I don't know. Yeah,
it could happen.
I don't know what to tell you. I said the URL, so if they're really determined, they're going to do it anyway.
I appreciate having the opportunity to talk to people. I do feel, and I've said this to folks, the discussion is not about majority. It's not about hate or anything like that. It really is concern. And I want people to know that we hear people's concerns, that this is not a us versus them. This is not about citizens against immigrants. I do believe that like I said, today I'm a U.S. citizen. I feel privileged. I cried during my ceremony. I threw myself my Wedding of America party on July 4th to celebrate this.
Yeah.
But, I just want to make sure that people know and understand that we hear their concerns and welcome, an opportunity like this to have this dialogue.
Excellent. Likewise. Gaby Pacheco, thanks for coming in. And I don't know, I wish you luck personally. Let me put it that way, even though we don't agree on the specific political objectives. But anyway, thanks again for coming in. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, Mark.
So that's it for this week's episode of Parsing Immigration Policy. This is Mark Krikorian, hoping that you will tune in next week. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks to our producer, Brian Griffith. And I hope you tune in next week.